Monson said to me, "Young Hamborough shot himself. See and find something and bring him up to the house." There was no gun near the body, and Monson was not carrying a gun when I first saw him. I saw a wound on the back of the head, and there was a good pool of blood under the head on the ground. After placing the rug under Hamborough's feet, we drew it below the body. It was lifted and placed in the cart and taken up to the house.
I implicitly accepted the statement of witnesses Monson and Scott that the injuries to Hamborough were due to an accidental shot from his own gun. Having handled and tried the gun, now in the possession of the Procurator Fiscal, I am convinced the injuries were not caused in the way I thought possible.
Lloyd's Weekly London newspaper, September 3rd, Monson's arrest. The excitement regarding the case reached a climax on Wednesday afternoon when Mr. Monson, the tenant of Ardlamont, was arrested. Sheriff Shape and the representatives of the criminal authorities for the county took an extraordinary number of precognitions on Tuesday, and the substance of these was, it was alleged, sufficient to justify them in taking this important step. An application to the Home Secretary for authority to exhume the body of Lieutenant Hamborough was duly dispatched to the Home Office on Thursday. Mr. McNaughton, Procurator Fiscal, left for the Isle of Wight on Friday.
The year is 1893. 20-year-old Lieutenant Windsor Dudley Cecil Hamborough has been killed on a hunting estate on the west coast of Scotland. At first it was believed to be an accident, but then, 10 days later, that shifted to a murder investigation. The chief suspect, Monson, has been arrested. A second suspect, Scott, has vanished. The grounds of the hunting estate where it happened, Ardlamont House, have been locked down by the police, and they're now turning their attention back to the body. I'm Pennie Stuart. This is Inside Forensic Science, the Ardlamont Mystery. Episode 3, The Postmortem and the Gun. And a word of warning, this episode contains some pretty graphic descriptions.
Dr. Henry Duncan Littlejohn. I am Surgeon of Police and Lecturer in Medical Jurisprudence at the Surgeons' Hall, Edinburgh. At the request of the Crown Agent, I went to Ventnor in the Isle of Wight in the beginning of September for the purpose of making an examination of the late Mr. Hamborough. The body was disinterred. The Depute Procurator Fiscal of Argyllshire was there, and also my colleague Dr. Macmillan, Tina Bruach, who had seen the body after death and who knew the deceased in life. When the body was disinterred, a post-mortem examination was made. Dr. Sanders was present on behalf of the prisoner in our making the following report.
The names of the various experts involved in this are going to become important. We have Dr. Littlejohn and Dr. Macmillan on behalf of the Crown. In Scotland, that's the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, who are the prosecution. You might remember from episode 1, Dr. Macmillan was the local GP who was first called to the scene. And then we have Dr. Saunders present on behalf of the defence. And, because you can never have too many doctors in the house, let's introduce another, our own modern-day pathologist, Dr. Richard Shepherd.
Exhumations present a problem because clearly it will have associated with a significant delay between death, and anything that delays the examination after death is likely to lead to facts and features being obscured. However, a delay of only a month is not necessarily critical, and in fact placing the body in a coffin and placing it then in a vault or underground, whichever it was, actually slows decomposition and will assist the process.
The body of a tall, well-proportioned young man was disclosed fully dressed for the grave. The features were somewhat swollen, but admitted of ready identification by the Depute Procurator Fiscal of Argyllshire, Mr. McNaughton, and by one of our number, Dr. Macmillan, Tina Bruach, as well as that of Windsor Dudley Cecil Hamborough. Decomposition was making slow progress, and the body generally was well preserved. The cuticle, or outer skin, everywhere separated with facility.
If we look at 6 months or a year or 5 years, then clearly different factors are going to affect how the body is going to be preserved. And that's the crucial thing. Can you still examine the body? Are the marks and features still present? And in this case, they were obviously able to do a reasonably successful examination, but it does obscure some of the features that might have been seen straight off. And one has to also hope that there hasn't been any alteration in the main findings by people interfering deliberately with the body.
In terms of the post-mortem, there were medical examiners or medical experts from both the prosecution and the defence at the post-mortem. Is that something you'd normally expect?
Yes. Well, in a case like this where there has been a delay and there are people who have been accused, then yes, you would. I mean, technically, there is the possibility for the defence to have someone attending a post-mortem at every post-mortem that we perform. But of course, they happen so quickly. Often no one's charged and the solicitors aren't up to speed. And there may well be a second post-mortem examination done at a later point at which the prosecution will often attend. So, yes, it is professionally very useful for you both to be there because things can be identified and pointed out and discussed. And we are, after all, there to get the best evidence for court. And having the two experts there together and looking and agreeing is far better for a court than people doing things individually and going, oh, well, I didn't see that or I don't agree with that. So, yes, it will happen. And when there is the time, it does happen.
One point of definite difference in terms of how things would proceed today is that in 1893, the local GP, Dr. Macmillan, was present at the post-mortem.
I'm Dr. Miles Mack, and I've been a GP partner in Dingwall Medical Group for the last 30 years.
Would a contemporary rural GP ever be
No,
present?
not that I'm aware of. I think that there are some areas where doctors have got dual roles and will also have pathology roles in very rural areas. But even that, I don't think that happens anymore. I think that happened within my professional career, but I'm not sure whether that happens anywhere in Scotland now.
And it's not part, again, of any training by the sounds of it? Do you have pathology as part of, forensic pathology as part of your training?
Not forensic pathology, no. And there were times when we were trailed down as junior doctors by our consultant to the pathology department because it deemed to be professionally the right thing to do to speak with the pathologist who's undertaken the post-mortem. And I think it was actually a very useful thing. There's nothing that is probably the best learning experience you've got about what you did in life is to find out what happened in death. Particularly in my career, I think we had so much less diagnostic opportunities that people were dying in unexplained circumstances in hospital more. And that's but I think that probably happens less now.
Just a word of warning, we've got details from the post-mortem coming up if you're a bit squeamish.
This wound was of a triangular shape, the base of the triangle being towards the face. At its base, it had a width of 2.5 inches. At its middle, it measured 2 inches, whence it tapered off posteriorly. The right ear was mutilated, portion of its external surface being a wanting, leaving a lacerated surface measuring from above downwards 1.5 inches and leaving the upper part of the ear and its lobe below intact.
How much information is it possible to get from a post-mortem in terms of a shooting like this?
There's a lot of information that can be obtained. Here we're talking about a shotgun. So we're talking about assessing pellets, pellet injuries, pellet spread. And those things are going to be easily identified on the body. The difficulty will often come in assessing exactly how the shot has been fired, because, needless to say, human beings are infinitely mobile. and they may have been facing the assailant 2 seconds before the gun is discharged and then turn round and are shot in the back. And you have to be a little wary about making big interpretations of where the gun is in relation to the individual and interpreting that into what was going on at the scene. But we should be able to identify from the post-mortem examination, particularly with a shotgun injury. Rifle injuries can be harder and handgun injuries can be hard too. But shotgun injuries, we should be very good at saying this is an entry wound. And there are actually in humans, unless it's a very close shot, there are very unlikely to be exit wounds in these cases.
Can you explain a bit more about why a shotgun shot wouldn't expect to have an exit wound?
Shotgun injuries seldom have an exit wound simply because each individual pellet is slowed down so markedly by its passage through the tissues of the body. There are exceptions. So suicidal discharges in the mouth or around the head, they may well have significant external and exit damage as well. But generally speaking, the point of a shotgun is to hit the target with a lot of pellets to cause injury, but there's no need for the pellets to exit. In fact, they need to remain. And because they're small, they individually have relatively low levels of kinetic energy and momentum. They tend to get stopped and remain in the body.
In ascertaining how an injury has been caused, there are certain matters familiar to doctors as aids to the determination of the question. In the first place, the direction of the wound is most important. In this case, the direction was from behind forward, and this I would conclude from the triangular shape of the wound in front, presenting this comparatively smooth, beveled appearance, gradually passing on and producing a larger amount of laceration. And finally, we have this condition of the ear, which, in my opinion, settles the question of the direction of the wound. The characteristics of the wound which I found in the skull were such as a wound from behind forward would lead me to expect. It appears to me, from the small number of pellets which we found in the brain, it was only the outside of the charge which inflicted the injuries we have described in the report.
Nowadays, we are very fortunate because we have ballistics experts who will come along and assist us, and they have much greater knowledge of all types of weapons and all types of ammunition, and they are a fantastic resource that we now use. In any case of shooting, there will be a ballistics expert with us at the post-mortem, and they will also examine the scene as well.
My name's Rachel Sharp. I'm Forensic Firearms Examiner at SPA, which is the Scottish Police Authority. I've been doing this for the last 20 years, in forensics, 24 years altogether. As a firearms examiner, what we do is we examine all items firearms related that are in relation to crime and the law. So we start a crime scene and end in the courtroom. We would work very closely with the pathologist to determine what angles and what shot had been used and give advice to the pathologist to what they need to be looking for inside the wound, shot, wadding maybe. I think we deal with a lot more firearms situations than they do, so we can offer them a lot of information as well as them letting us know how the shot reacts with the body. Or if indeed the wound was caused by a firearm to start with, or the damage that we're looking at was caused by a firearm, what kind of firearm was used, what kind of distance the firearm was used at, and we can determine ranging and direction of fire and that sort of thing. We use everything that we've picked up at the scene to corroborate or refute witness statements.
How would you establish that it was a gun that was fired that caused the wound?
Well, the things that we'd be looking for would be what the wound looks like. Again, if we were attending a crime scene and there was a body there, we would be looking all around the body for things like the fired cartridge cases. Fired cartridge cases can give us a big indication of what type of gun was used. So the gun in this case was shotguns. So if we found shotgun cartridges at a crime scene, it's quite a good indication that a shotgun's been fired in that vicinity. It would also tell us what type of firearm had been fired. So if they're at the scene, it might indicate that an automatic or a semi-automatic weapon had been used because the cartridges has been ejected out of the gun. Again, if you don't find any cartridge cases at the scene, it doesn't mean it's not that type of gun, but it's also some things that we can look at.
So, in a contemporary case, the forensic firearms examiner has a key role, working in partnership with the pathologist. Back in 1893, doctors Littlejohn, Macmillan and Saunders needed to work it all out for themselves. Let's return to Littlejohn's post-mortem report.
The effects would have been quite different if the wound had been from the side. The skull would have been entirely broken up, and the whole of the charge would have been found in the cavity of the skull itself. The membrane dividing the hemispheres of the brain could not possibly have been intact as we found it. If the shot had been from below upwards, we would have found the skull in a shattered condition. The direction of the wound as we found it is quite inconsistent with its being inflicted from below upwards or from the front backwards. The distance from which the shot is fired is also an aid to the doctor in determining how a wound has been inflicted.
Once again, looking at the skull, reconstructing the skull, difficult though it might have been, would actually give you quite a lot of information about the angle that the shot hit the head. But once again, remember, human beings are infinitely mobile. And the fact that it's coming up from down below doesn't necessarily mean that he was shot from below upwards. He might have been bending down, tying his shoelace, and shot from above downwards. Are you with me? So, you can only talk about the relative positions of gun to person, not the absolute position of where they must have been standing at the time that they were shot. And interestingly, then you tie that in with the witness statements who say, yes, he bent down to pick up a rabbit that he'd shot. Well, then this shot is actually coming downwards, not going upwards.
It never occurred to me that the shot might be coming downwards. So you've completely thrown me again now.
Well, there you are. You see, but we can only talk about relative positions. Other people have to give us what their positions were to their recollection. Of course, now we have CCTV. 1893, they didn't. So, and he was only out. What was he only out with 2 other people? So, he's out with one man who's been charged with murder and another man. We need to know what they say happened. Do their accounts tally?
One of them's disappeared altogether, so we actually only have the accused.
Monson.
Yeah.
Yes. That's not too good in terms of reliable, potentially unreliable or reliable evidence. But that's nowadays, well, always this is the witness evidence is really important, and other factual things. Say CCTV is crucial now to understand if these, and it is when we have it is absolutely fantastic because it gives us all of that exactly describing what goes on.
Something else CCTV might have told us was which gun Hambro was using and which gun he was shot with. The post-mortem is pretty clear and no one seems in any disagreement about the fact that Hambro died from a shotgun wound to the head. If it was an accident, you'd have expected him to have been shot by his own gun. If it was murder, then you might, emphasising the word might, expect his wounds to have come from a different gun. So let's look at the 2 shotguns Hambro and Monson were using to go hunting. Here's George Lamont, the second gamekeeper.
It was my duty to attend Mr. Hamborough and Mr. Monson when they went out and was available whenever wanted. On the morning of the 10th, I first saw Monson at 7 o'clock. He came to my house at the offices to tell me to go to McIntyre, the head keeper, with a message that he was wanted at 10 o'clock as the gentlemen were going out. I'm in the habit of keeping the guns for the purpose of cleaning them. And Mr. Monson asked me for Mr. Hamborough's 20-bore gun, saying that Mr. Hamborough wanted it. I went off with the head keeper, who lives 2 miles away from the mansion house, and got back about 10:30. On my way down, I heard of the death. I did not know till then that anyone had been out shooting that morning. I'd heard nothing of it. When I got back to the house, I saw Monson, and he said to McIntyre in my presence that Mr. Hamborough fell, his gun went off, and he shot himself. When I saw Monson in the smoking room after the death, he seemed very much excited and distressed. He was scarcely able to speak. Nothing was said at the time about the guns. I went down with White to where the body had been. I saw the gun wad, which White picked up just beside the turf. There was blood on one side of it. It was thrown away carelessly. The wad I found was a 12-bore cartridge wad. I opened one of the cartridges which I saw Monson use for the 20-bore gun, and I am satisfied that the wad I saw on the dyke was not one of these. 12-bore wads are much, much thicker.
Hamborough usually used a 20-bore shotgun. Monson usually used a 12-bore. The wad which was found at the scene was from a 12-bore. Over to Duncan Mackenzie, our dear stalker, for a bit of a lesson in ballistics. First question, tell us the difference between 12 and 20 and why the business of this wad might have been significant. Probably need to also see what a wad is.
Okay, we'll have a look at this then.
So you just
So this is modern cartridges.
Right.
So that's a 12 and that's a 20, much smaller.
Oh right, yeah.
So that is the wad out of a 12.
So that's a kind of a plug, a pack that goes...
Yeah, basically what the makeup is, you've got your cartridge case, you've got your primer that sits there, and then when we're making shells, you put the primer in, you then drop your powder in, so the powder will sit up to about here,
Yep.
and then your wad compresses down on top of the powder,
Yep.
and then that little cup on the wad, there's a plastic wad, you fill with lead, depending on how much shot you want to put in it, and then it's crimped. So then when you put that into your shotgun and you pull your trigger, the firing pin goes forward, hits the primer, and that causes a tiny little explosion within the primer, which in the event of that, it then ignites the powder in there, and because it's within the confines of a barrel against the action, so that's the solid bit here, that's called the action, and it's held within the barrel, the pellets within, because there's a huge explosion in here, maybe 2 1/4 ton per square inch in here, yeah,
Wow.
within inside that, it's going to find the place of least resistance, which is out the open barrel. So what happens is you pull your trigger and your wad flies down the barrel, all the shot's still in here at that time. As it gets out into the open air, this loses its speed, its momentum, because it hasn't got the mass to follow. So the shot flies away into the distance and the wad falls down.
We can see the difference between 12-bore and 20-bore
Yeah.
in terms of the cartridge size.
Yeah.
What's the difference in terms of a 12-bore and a 20-bore gun?
Okay, there's absolutely no difference in, first of all, the cartridge, because it's the same charge. So basically all you've got there is you've got a reduced size of cartridge, so it's less recoil. So the ladies prefer the 20-bore, or specialists use it too, because you've got less lead going up into the air. But it's going at the same speed, same pressures, it'll make the same hole in you as a 12-bore, but there's just less lead because it's in a smaller case.
The size of the pellets is irrelevant because a 20-bore and a 12-bore can both fire cartridges that contain number 5 or number 6 size shot, which is what this case talks about.
Would you know from looking at something, anything, whether it had been shot by a 12 or a 20?
No. No.
No difference at all?
No. Because the shot size is the same. They both used around about 3/4 of an ounce of shot. You wouldn't tell.
You couldn't tell?
No.
Okay.
To be honest, and I think the case talked about the pellet patterns quite a lot, and there wasn't that much difference in the two guns to what pellet patterns produced. So I don't think you could identify which gun was used from the pellet pattern. The only thing I could see in this case that would identify which gun was used would be the 12-bore wadding that was found, and you have to then try and associate it to the gun. But in the case of a shotgun, you can't specifically do that.
So that brings us back to that wad and whether that provides a clue as to which gun Hambro was shot with.
Well, that's a 20 plastic wad on my left, and that's your 12-bore wad on the right. And there's no way you're going to make a mistake with that.
Okay.
If you're shooting at all,
Now,
you know.
what was the wad that was found there?
12 bore
So-
with blood on it.
Yeah. So the fact that 12 bore was found there might be significant, but we don't know whether there's been other shooting
Correct.
happening there. I mean, he
Correct.
could have just bled onto a wad that
Correct.
was fallen on the ground anyway.
Yeah.
So a bloody wad might just be his blood on a wad that was already there.
Yeah.
Although, if it had been a 12-bore cartridge and a 12-bore wad,
Yeah.
and that was the wad that was from the shot that killed Hambro,
Yeah.
then actually it may be evidence that that's the gun that was used to kill him, because we know there was a 20 and we know there was a 12,
Yeah.
and it was one of those.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
okay. Would you know if a wad was freshly out of a gun or had been lying around? What do you think?
Well, what happens here is, in fact, I can destroy this one for you, okay? So we do know it's been raining very heavily. So what this is felt, compressed felt wad, just cardboardy, papery stuff.
Yeah.
So if I just get my nails, see what's happening?
So it breaks apart really easily.
Yeah. Now you put West Highland weather onto the top of that for a week or two, and that just flattens into the ground. That's why they're trying to get back to felt wads now, because cows, etc., were eating the plastic wads.
Okay. So from that point of view, if a wad had been lying around on the ground for a while, it's pouring with rain, it's likely to be disintegrating, or it's going to absorb that water, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So again, we've got an experienced gamekeeper
Yep.
out there
Yep.
who knows his wads,
Yep.
and will likely know if something is not rain soaked.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
If there was a cartridge case maybe recovered at the scene or taken out of one of the guns later on, then the cartridge case will have an indentation on it that is caused by the firing pin on the actual gun. And we can use that mark and that impression to match a cartridge case to a specific gun. But that wasn't found at the crime scene here. And as far as I know, it wasn't recovered. It was an examination that wasn't done in this case.
So that's almost like a fingerprint of a specific gun.
Exactly, yes.
We don't have a cartridge case. We don't have the bloody wad either, even if it could tell us something useful, because it was lost at the scene, as we heard last episode. So far, we don't really have very much evidence to go on. Let's head back to Dr. Littlejohn and the post-mortem, because there's another bit of detail which may provide more evidence to support the idea that the 12-bore shotgun was the one which killed Hambro.
I may mention that before touching the wound, we subjected it to careful examination with a lens in order, if possible, to determine any blackening, any scorching, or any foreign particle. 4 minute particles were seen, which at first looked like 4 small pieces of coal. On no part of the edges or surface was there any appearance of blackening, as if from gunpowder or scorching, but 4 minute specks, apparently metallic, were found adhering to the edges. These were removed and preserved.
Does it seem a bit odd to you that if Hambro had tripped and shot himself at close quarters, why was there no scorching or marks from the black powder which the gun would have been charged with? And it can't just be down to decomposition, because we know from Dr. Macmillan's observations of when he first saw Hambro, just after he'd been shot, which we heard back in episode 1, that he hadn't noticed scorching either.
I examined the wound to see if there was any blackening or singeing, but could find traces of neither.
And this is where our story takes another twist.
It was about a fortnight after he'd been examined by the fiscal that Monson first spoke to me about a change of guns. When I was being examined by the fiscal, he told me to get the 20-bore gun and an amberite cartridge and bring them to him. So I went to Monson and asked for them, who discovered the mistake he had made and said that when he came down with the 20-bore gun that morning, Hambro had out the 12-bore gun on the front lawn to try the amberite cartridges. I had heard nothing of this before.
Amberite. No, I'd never heard of it either. Amberite.
Amberite, right. So this was the powder differences in 1893. You still had your black powder. So black powder was invented by, I think it was the Chinese in the 11th century.
So this is like gunpowder?
Yeah, this
Right.
is your gunpowder.
Okay.
And it's a brew of charcoal, saltpetre and sulphur. So they mix it all up, and it's extremely explosive in bulk, very smoky in the firearm, and a fair old recoil. You see later on, there's a fair old thump comes off it.
Okay.
So they started, first of all, in about 1860 with stuff called Schultz, which was a Schultz powder. So it wasn't developed significantly until about 1874, something like that.
So they wanted something that didn't have the black
Correct.
residue in
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Plus, of course, the black powder is hugely corrosive in barrels, so the firearms fall to bits. Whereas the amberite and the Schultz were much cleaner burning, and they weren't leaving the same residue, the same carbon muck in the barrel. With black powder, you had to flush it out with boiling water and all sorts of bloody things to save your shotgun. So the Schultz powder, much reduced recoil, and Ailey and Kynoch, they were the specialists making the shells at that time. They both used this powder in their cartridges, and it was a clean burning powder. Now the one that interests us is amberite, and this only started 1892, so it's only a year out.
So it's brand new technology, really.
Brand new technology.
Yeah.
And it was an early smokeless white powder. But it could be used in the BP, the black powder proofed guns.
But nowadays, black powder is very unusual. We still do get cartridges with black powder in, and we would still perform the same tests with the deposits, because obviously black powder burns very dirty. It's very dirty, and that's why you would get more deposits on a wound. You would get more deposits on a target of some point, and that's what the big issue here was the amberite going to produce less deposits, so that it would be more difficult to determine the distance as which the shot had been fired.
Duncan wanted to demonstrate the difference for me by firing a black powder cartridge at a white card target, so I could see for myself just how much black smoke and residue is produced. As Rachel mentioned, black powder cartridges are relatively rare, so we used one made especially for us by Ben Kinnamond Miller, a gunsmith on Skye, to try and replicate the kind of cartridge which might have been used in 1893. So you're going to load up the gun. I'm going to go and step back to a distance.
Okay.
And then give me a shout. I'll tell you when I'm clear.
Okay.
And we're good to go.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, Dan, clear. Well, Duncan, I could see that cloud.
Aye.
Even from standing back where I was, there was a puff of smoke from that.
Yeah.
That was the black powder, was it?
Mm-hmm. Messy stuff.
Really messy.
Messy stuff. So when the smokeless came in, it was a revolutionary evolution in the firearms. It really was. Can you see on the target here? Can you see the carbon all sprayed round it? See all that wee black marks?
Oh, let's go and look closer at that.
See all this?
Yeah. So there's
Let me
basically a dusting of
Yeah, look at it all around there.
and that's from black powder.
Yeah. It goes right down there. See, there wasn't a mark on this paper. That's up there too.
Yeah.
That's all black powder spray. And I don't know what the forensic was like in those days, but I think they would have detected some of that.
So the key things are amberite is a cleaner,
Yep.
a cleaner way of shooting, basically.
Correct.
And the significance here is that
The 12 bore was using amberite.
apparently Hambro was using the 12 bore and had been experimenting with amberite. And the reason that's significant is because there wasn't any black powder residue on the head.
Yeah, but again, it's just my suspicious mind. It just doesn't right. Monson is saying, Hambro wanted to practice on the lawn with amberite. So he set the scene. He set the gun in Hambro's hand with amberite. But there's Hambro. He's always used the 20. He's wandered about with a 20 all the time. And why would he change? You know, he's had a go on the lawn. There's no real difference in the powder.
But they didn't have any amberite cartridges for the 20.
No, it was only BP. But if he shot himself in the back of the head with the 20, then I think Monson has been a clever guy in saying, I've got to kill him with the 12 bore because there's going to be less residue on the back of the head. But I've got to set the scene for Hambro to have used it earlier in the day in the lawn, practicing with the thing.
So you think Monson might have... So probably Hambro had been playing with... Do you think he had been practicing with the
Yeah,
amberite?
I think Monson said, have a go with this, see what you think of this. So he's banging away on the lawn with it. This is a great thing. And we don't know what happened. He could have been wandering about with his 20 bore and shot with the 12. And then they said, oh, well, he had the 12 that day. Well, we don't know. And of course, it never came out in a trial.
Okay. You're very suspicious of
Very,
Monson,
very
aren't you?
suspicious of
Very,
him.
very suspicious of Monson.
Well, both of them.
Oh, Monson and Scott.
Yeah.
You've got fingered both of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think happened, based on the evidence which we've been able to gather to this point? It looks like Hambro may well have been shot with the 12-bore gun, using an amberite smokeless cartridge. The bloody wad for a 12-bore certainly seems to back that theory up. Problem is, we don't know who had the 12-bore gun. Had Hambro been trying it out as Monson suggested? We've no proof or evidence either way. Neither of the Ardlamont gamekeepers were on the estate at the time Hambro was shot. The only people who know the truth of it are Monson and Scott. And Scott is still at large. There's another small twist in the case against Monson. So much of this case seems to be creating noise and distraction, so personally, I'm not sure whether this is just more noise or something we should factor into our verdict when it comes. In the indictment, Monson is accused of attempting to drown Hambro in a boating incident the day before the shooting. The suggestion being that he, or Scott perhaps, had deliberately made a hole in the boat using a knife earlier in the day, knowing that Hambro couldn't swim. There's a lot of time and energy given over to exploring this in the case files. I'm going to park it because it doesn't feel strictly relevant to our focus, which is the forensic evidence. But maybe you'd like to go and read the trial papers to see what you think. You'll find a link in the show notes. If you think Monson or Scott, maybe both, did attempt to murder Hambro the evening before he was shot, it might impact on your view of the evidence. So, how do we make some headway with this? Well, let's return to the post-mortem for one final time this episode to hear a key detail before we move the investigation forward.
The shot seems to have gone through a portion of the flap of the ear, between the lobe and the upper part, carrying it away. The shot was scattering at the time, and I have no doubt the chief body of the shot may have passed through that portion of the ear. My idea is that the impact of the mass of the shot caused the wound, and that it then deflected, passing through the ear and on into space. There were only 4 pellets found altogether, all having entered the brain through the aperture. I examined the skull both before and after the skin and hair were removed, and saw no trace of any appearance of pellets there. There were no stray pellets outside the brain. Undoubtedly, the mass of the shot must have come against the head with a pretty smart blow. There was only one aperture made, but there was fracturing of adjacent portions of the skull. That was the effect of the impact and the explosive force of the shot as it passed onwards.
According to Dr. Littlejohn, the wound indicates that only some of the shot from the gun which killed Hambro went into his head, and he says the shot was scattering at the time. Dr. Richard Shepherd again.
A discharge of a shotgun is designed to spread pellets. It's designed to produce a large area of potential kill. If you're shooting a duck or a bird, you want to be able to cover a large area of sky in the hope of catching that particular animal that you're shooting at. And so the spread is important. It's also important forensically because they used to be able to think that by looking at the spread, you could be reasonably certain about the distance between the end of the muzzle and the individual as they were shot.
And if you can work out the distance between the end of the muzzle and Hambro's head, you can answer the puzzle at the very heart of this entire case.
For me, the major question is it possible that the wound was self-inflicted or not? And once you have the answer to that question, then that's the leap-off point for all the rest of the evidence.
Ashley Edwards KC, who we'll be hearing more of in future episodes. Is it possible to prove that Hambro could or could not have shot himself? Even if Monson did try to drown Hambro the night before he died, does that make him guilty of murder? And we still haven't got to the bottom of why anyone would want Hambro dead in the first place. More on that coming up next episode when we go in search of a possible motive. Oh, and Scott. What on earth has happened to Scott?
Westminster Gazette, 7th November. Officials for the prosecution in the Ard-Lamont mystery have decided to issue a notice to the public with regard to the man Scott, in which will be given his real name, description and recent whereabouts. The document will be posted at all police stations in the course of the day and will read to the effect that one Edward Sweeney, alias Edward Scott, alias Edward Davis, known in racing circles as Ted Davis or Long Ted, is wanted in reference to a charge of murder.
In episode 3 of the Ard-Lamont mystery, the experts were Dr. Richard Shepherd, Rachel Sharp, Dr. Miles Mack, Duncan Mackenzie and Ashley Edwards KC. The actors were Alan Richardson, Mark Stephen, Sam Young, David Stenhouse, Chris Dolan and Jake Lee. Inside Forensic Science is written and presented by me, Pennie Stuart. The story consultants and series researchers are Heather Duran and Clara Morris. The sound mix is by Steve Ball. Inside Forensic Science, the Ard-Lamont mystery is an Adventurous audio production for the Leverhulme Research Centre for Forensic Science at the University of Dundee and is funded by the Leverhulme Trust.